Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shells, deaths, slavers, peasants, vassals, criminals. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And today, I'm going to do a video back in the USA about the police and the police state of mind. And I did a version of this earlier that I think about 10 people saw before I pulled it. And it was just too convoluted when I watched it again, and I wasted a lot of time. And I'm going to do a much better job this time. An important topic, though, because how do we arrive at this point where, as I brought up in numerous videos about the militarization of police, police brutality morphing into police sadism, and this frame of mind, this us and them adversarial relationship that the police have with the citizenry now. And this is not a figment of my imagination. It's everywhere you look if you're looking for the right things, and it's pretty blatant, so there's not much one can say about it. When we get to the point where we have a policeman pull over someone, citizens, and granted the citizens in this car are questionable, but to point a gun at somebody in the back seat that's on a cell phone and say, "I'll fucking put a round in your ass so quick," seems a little inappropriate. And I understand how this sort of attitude and this sort of vocabulary can develop in that situation. I don't want to be a prude, but on the other hand, as policemen, they're paid a lot, and they're supposed to be well trained to handle these situations and represent the state and represent the citizenry, as it were. But they represent the state. They don't represent the citizenry. So they exemplify this fissure that's developed between the state and the citizenry. They are the line, the demarcation point. And another example of this odd phenomenon where the powers that be, the state, get one part of the peasants to control the other part of the peasants. And we see this all over the world. It's rather interesting. And that ties in well with the whole idea of the state of mind, the policeman's state of mind, the police state of mind. This attitude where, given the right tools of authority by the state and by the powers that be, these other peasants and citizenry are transformed into tools of oppression against the other peasants. A strange phenomenon indeed. And so we also have police saying things like, even though, and this is an editorial in the Washington Street Journal, I believe, quote, a police chief from New York, quote, "Even though it may sound harsh and impolite, here is the bottom line. If you don't want to get shot, tased, pepper sprayed, struck with a baton, or thrown to the ground, just do what I tell you. Don't argue with me. Don't call me names. Don't tell me that I can't stop you. Don't say I'm a racist pig. Don't threaten that you'll sue me and take away my badge. Don't scream at me that you pay my salary, and don't even think of aggressively walking towards me. Most field stops are complete in minutes," unquote. So he pretty much lays down the law, as it were, and basically doesn't want to be challenged at any level. And once again, I suggest that these people are well trained. They're supposed to be well trained. They're certainly well paid, and they need to adopt a different attitude to that, particularly in an era where they use the mantra of the increasing violence and increasing firepower of violence, which is actually statistically incorrect as violent crimes go down. And then there's another a quote from a New York police officer. He says, quote, "There is an attitude in our streets today that it is acceptable to resist arrest. That attitude is a direct result of a lack of respect for law enforcement," unquote. Well, first of all, I don't think there's an attitude that it is acceptable to resist arrest. I think the things that we see so many people ended up arrested for are worth resisting. And if police weren't involved in so much instant arresting, perhaps they wouldn't encounter this phenomenon so often. And then, and as far as a direct disrespect for law enforcement, they only have themselves to blame. There's enough glorification of the police in society that if attitudes are starting to change because there's certain things happening out in the field, then that's just how things fall. And so one of the other reasons that we have this police state of mind, one could go into all sorts of cultural effects. We see a police force now with people who are raised on the acceptance of steroids. So we have this camaraderie in a way between the military, sports, and police, because we have this badass culture, this steroid culture. One of the things I think that's interesting is to see when I did this video about these Texas police shooting this guy 80 times. After they finished, they gave themselves fist bumps. And I was struck at how eerie it was to watch another video of U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and they're fighting with some Taliban, and the helicopters come in and blow up the position of the Taliban, and the two soldiers fist bumped themselves the same way these police officers were. But I think there's a big difference between fist bumping because you're taking on the enemy in the field, and the difference between slaughtering an American citizen, regardless of alleged crimes, in a truck stop with 80 rounds. So we have this steroid culture. We have this video game culture. Games like Grand Theft Auto, I think, leave quite an impression. And then we have a zillion police shows, and we've always had police shows for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And also movies that also glorify the police. And in the movies, you tend to find the anti-hero, the bad cop who does bad things in order to achieve good ends. And this is, I think, a very important element. We live in an era of the anti-hero, and I don't think that could be emphasized enough. And it started we had prototypes, of course, for the anti-hero, but we had the cop anti-hero with movies like Dirty Harry in the 70s, and a TV show called Kojak, where these policemen operated on a thin line and oftentimes outside the law, and this was applauded. And who can forget the Death Wish movies with Charles Bronson, although he wasn't a cop. But we see this phenomenon of the policemen being judge, jury, and executioner, and that's where we have to ask ourselves, is this the kind of police we want? When you look at all the other arguments about police brutality and police behavior in the field, it boils down to that. Do we want the police to be judge, jury, and executioner in the field? And so there's a couple things that contribute to why we have this attitude in this police state of mind in United States police forces now. I think it's because, one, they're very insular, as we've seen. It's hard to fire a cop. It's hard to have them chastised for any aberrant behavior. They have a very strong union. It seems like inevitably, no matter what happens, they can always get their job back. Look at the Ferguson cops who ended up, one was indicted in several cases for pistol whipping children, and then another one was in a disbanded police force because they were so racist they couldn't be salvaged. And two of those officers ended up in Ferguson. So we have plenty of examples of this insularism. Another example of that is the Seattle police here, who are now suing. Over 100 Seattle policemen are suing to have these new federal guidelines for restrictions on how much lethal and how much abuse they can use in the field, and they don't even want to be challenged on that. And another way they're insular is the policeman who shot that young veteran down in California and hit him with the tear gas canister. He's being reinstated by the police there, and he's going to get 2 years back pay. And this is after paying out $4.5 million to the victim. So this is a very insular group, and that certainly encourages all this activity. And we get this encouragement from the officer corps all the way to the top is where this kind of activity comes from. And it's so clubby, certainly on the officer level, that even the hierarchy would have a hard time reining in this club atmosphere. And that also comes with the union aspect of the police. People have to remember that this is a union, a very strong union with an incredible benefits package, and they act like a union. And then there's the rewards, of course, being a policeman. Not only can you intimidate nearly anyone you approach, and this behavior is going to be encouraged because you can do that, but there's all these side rewards and temptations. Essentially being above the law in any situation. That includes speeding or being immune to facing any charges. If you kill, say, a pedestrian, this is a recent story, killing a pedestrian because you were distracted by your computer, and you're going to be immune. And so these are all these rewards that go along with and also property forfeiture for the drug war. You can have access to all the drugs you want. You can have access to prostitutes. I'm not saying all cops do this, but there's certainly a lot of that to that culture. And a lot of material ends up easily accessible by police, and this is well documented as well. And then, as we know, besides being insular, besides having all these rewards, there's also impunity. As I mentioned by these earlier about these Ferguson police, you could hardly have cops responsible for all the things that end up happening, and they're almost always done with internal investigations by their own comrades, and there's a very poor record of prosecuting any police for any of these infractions, and like I say, being insular, of course, this helps protect them as cops are doing these investigations, and always seem to clear them. And in fact, we have documentation that almost every police shooting that's ever happened is almost 100% justified anywhere you go. And then to get at the heart of the police state of mind, though, we have to look at human behavior, because that's the bottom line. I mean, it's not so much that cops per se are bad. It's the fact that we have humans. They're put in this situation, and it brings out certain characteristics. And it's exemplified very well in what's known as the Stanford Prison Experiment of 1971. And I'll include some documentation about that below. It's very fascinating, well worth watching. They took 24 undergrads out of 70 volunteers, and they made sure they had no criminal background, they lacked any psychological issues, had no medical problems, and then they whittled it down to 24 undergraduates. And so they had 12 guards and 12 prisoners. And so they were going to essentially set up a real prison situation and observe the behavior of these people in that situation. And so they gave the guards, the students as guards, all the trappings of the symbols of the state of authority. They gave them a whistle, they gave them a billy club, they gave them a uniform, they gave them handcuffs, and interestingly, they gave them reflective sunglasses. And one of the people who served as a guard talked about the fact that those reflective sunglasses that were seen so prevalently with police as well is like having a mask. And it says it makes you capable of taking an extra step further, things you wouldn't normally do because you have this mask on. So that's very, very telling. And so what ended up happening is that even though the guards who were playing, or the students who were playing the guards, knew full well that they were acting out in a scenario, and that the people who were the prisoners, the students playing the prisoners, were not actually prisoners and hadn't actually done anything wrong. Just the setup of this dynamic of one group of peasants versus the other group of peasants. And in this situation, students against students, and they gave one authority over the other. And a study that was supposed to go on for 2 weeks ended up being stopped in 6 days because the behavior got so out of control. The guards ended up being very abusive in a matter of days, and everybody essentially psychologically broke down. And all it took was 6 days. And there's even scenes that are reminiscent of things we saw from Abu Ghraib, with prisoner students being marched naked down a corridor with bags over their heads and chained. And so this is an incredible experiment, but it shows exactly what can happen given the trappings of the power of authority that police have. Certainly they've got a lot more than a whistle, a billy club, a uniform, handcuffs, and sunglasses. And so this certainly contributes to the kind of behavior we see, this us and them. And certainly it serves the state to have a police force like this. And part of the reason why we all assume they want it militarized is a domestic occupation force, and they need this attitude, this police state of mind, because it's probably becoming clear that a citizen army is not going to be able to quell domestic unrest. They're no longer reliable. And now they have a domestic occupation force that is more than happy to fulfill the role, and certainly seems to have adopted to this police state of mind. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.